Hey guys, let me ask you something, and you can let me know in the comments below. Do you believe in coincidences, or do you feel that everything is arranged? And for those of you who think that everything just happens by chance, here are some strange coincidences that may change your mind. Number 1, John Wilkes Booth's brother and Abe Lincoln's son. Now, when you have a brother that killed a president, then no matter what you do, you're going to be known as the brother of the guy who killed the president. So a lot of you may not be familiar with the name Edwin Booth, whose infamous brother John Wilkes Booth, of course, was the man who assassinated President Lincoln. But what you may not know is that Edwin Booth was once known as the greatest actor of his time. Booth was considered one of the most famous Shakespearean actors of the 19th century and has portrayed Hamlet on stage more often than any other actor. He also founded his own theater in New York. Booth's Theater, as it was called, was considered one of the most modern and spectacular theaters of his time. Not only was he a brilliant actor, Edwin Booth was also credited for saving a person's life. So here's what happened. During the Civil War, a group of travelers were purchasing their tickets on a crowded train platform in Jersey City, New Jersey. A young man was pushed up against the train due to the crowd and fell into a gap between the train and the platform when the train was about to move. The young man probably would have been crushed by the train, but right then Edwin Booth grabbed the man's coat collar and pulled him to safety. The young man recognized Edwin Booth because, of course, he was a famous actor and thanked him. Later, Booth received a letter of commendation from his friend who was serving as an officer under General Ulysses S. Grant. Booth then found out that the young man he had saved was Robert Todd Lincoln, the son of President Abraham Lincoln. It was less than a year after this event that Booth's brother took the life of Lincoln's father. Number 2, Morgan Robertson in the Titanic. Long before a super tragic event turned movie that made Leonardo DiCaprio famous, an American author named Morgan Robertson wrote The Futility, or The Wreck of the Titan in 1898. Now take a look at the cover of the book, which could totally pass for a movie poster for the Titanic, and this was so strange because The Wreck of the Titan was published in 1898, 14 years before the Titanic was actually completed. And here are some creepy similarities between the book and what actually happened in real life. In the book, the boat is described as the largest ship of its day and was called the Titan. The two ships were practically the same size, both British-owned steel ships, with the Titanic measuring only 25 meters longer. Both ships, described as unsinkable, hit an iceberg and went under in mid-April around midnight. Both were capable of speeds over 20 knots. Despite having thousands of passengers on board, both ships carried the bare legal minimum number of lifeboats. In the book, the ship crashed into an iceberg 400 miles from Newfoundland at 25 knots. And get this, the Titanic crashed into an iceberg 400 miles from Newfoundland at 22.5 knots. And speaking of the Titanic, I didn't really like the movie. I mean, it's a good movie, don't get me wrong. But first of all, I already knew the ending. And spoiler alert, the ship sinks. I just don't like the fact that I'm going to a movie that I know has a very tragic ending and I'm gonna leave feeling all depressed. The other reason I didn't like this movie was the fact that, yeah, they both could have definitely fit on that board. And finally, I hated this scene.
I'll never let go. I promise.
She's a liar. If I was Jack, I'd come back as a ghost and haunt her and just keep whispering, I thought you weren't ever gonna let me go. Number 3, the brothers and the cab. 17-year-old Erskine Lawrence Eben was tragically hit and killed by a taxi in Hamilton, Bermuda while riding his moped. But what's strange about this story was that the previous year, his brother, who was 17 years old at the time, was also killed by a taxi on the same street. They were killed almost exactly 1 year apart, and they were both driving the same moped. Now, if you think that's really weird, you better sit down for this. According to the local newspaper, not only were the two brothers killed by the same taxi, they were killed by the same taxi with the same driver. Oh, and if that's not crazy enough for you, the taxi was also carrying the same passenger both times. So let's recap. Two brothers were hit and killed almost exactly 1 year apart while riding the same moped, by the same taxi with the same driver carrying the same passenger when both brothers were 17 years old on the same street. That's some Final Destination stuff right there. Number 4, the falling baby. In Detroit, sometime in the 1930s, a young mother who just really sucked at being a mom. And I don't really say this lightly, but I think you'll agree with me when you hear what happened. So the mother's baby somehow falls out of the window from a high floor. I mean, come on, how does that happen? Did the mom just let the kid play on the windowsill? Anyway, a man named Joseph Figlock was walking down the street, and the baby basically fell on top of him. The baby's fall was broken, and both man and baby were unharmed. 1 year later, and this is why this mom is just like the worst mom ever. 1 year later, the same baby, again, fell from the same window. The baby survived because, again, Joseph Figlock was walking down the street, and the baby, again, fell on top of him, and they both survived. Either this is super coincidental, or it's just a combination of the mom being a terrible mom and Joseph Figlock was some sort of a stalker who just hangs out under her window. Number 5, the identical twins. Identical twins, obviously, they look alike and maybe share other similarities, but check out this story from the January issue of Reader's Digest. So there were these twin boys who were born in Ohio and were separated at birth but adopted by different families who did not know each other. But both families ended up naming their boy James, and it only gets crazier from here. Both James grew up not knowing each other, of course, but they both had interest in law enforcement and carpentry. Okay, so that's not that strange, but then they both got married and their wives were both named Linda. Then they had kids, both boys. One of them named his boy James Allen. The other one named his boy James Allen with 2 L's. The two James eventually divorced their wives and married other women. Both women were named Betty, and both family had dogs. And of course, they both named their dogs Toy. They eventually found all this out when they reunited after 40 years of being separated. Number 6, King Umberto I. King Umberto was the king of Italy from January of 1878 until his death. So one day the king went to a small restaurant for dinner with one of his aides. He noticed that the owner of the restaurant was basically his doppelganger, so they started to chat. It turns out both men were born on the same day of the same year, March 14th, 1844. Both men had been born in the same town. Both men married a woman with the same name. The restaurant owner opened his restaurant on the same day that King Umberto was crowned the King of Italy. And here's the kicker. On July 29th, 1900, King Umberto was informed that the restaurant owner had died that day in a mysterious shooting accident. As the king expressed his regret, he was then assassinated by an anarchist in the crowd. Okay, so regardless of whether you believe these to be the act of God, the universe, were just pure coincidence, you have to admit that these events are incredibly strange and very improbable. In the East, many people attribute some of these types of coincidences to 缘分, or predestined relationships. It's a belief that all those who you meet in life are connected to you somehow through the many lives that you have lived. Like, for example, in the case of the man who happened to save the falling baby. Maybe in a past life, the baby, who of course was not a baby back then, may have saved him. I mean, have you ever met someone you felt an instant connection with, good or bad? Ever muttered the words, I really don't like this person, but I don't know why? Well, maybe that person stole your chicken in a past life. Or maybe you met your significant other under completely unbelievable circumstances, kind of like that movie Serendipity, which is awesome. I mean, think about it. Each decision you make, each step you take, basically determines who you may meet or may not meet in life. Personally, I don't believe in coincidences. I feel that everything that happens to me in life, whether good or bad, and everyone that I meet, there's a purpose to everything. I may not be clear to what the purpose is, but I think there's a purpose. But of course, let me know your thoughts on this topic. Thank you so much for watching. See you later.